It's late, maybe around 11:30, when you first hear the knocking. A slow, rhythmic sound coming from the front door. You slowly get up out of your chair and peek through the eye hole. That's when you see two small children, both with hoodies on, their eyes obscured. You open the door in concern. Why would these kids be out here this late, and where are their parents? Before you can ask these questions and more, one of the children asks, "Can we come in?" The voice is strange and slightly mechanical. Before you can answer, the other child now speaks. "We need to come in. Now." The hair stands up on the back of your neck. This isn't right. Something about these kids is off. A growing sense of dread washes over you. You start closing the door instinctually to block entry to your home. "We want in. Please?" Both children ask at the same time. They look up now from under their hoods, their eyes peering out, black as night, empty and black, soulless. You slam the door. These are the black-eyed children. The urban legend of the black-eyed children, also known as the black-eyed kids, or BEK, have drifted around the internet since the late 90s. 1998, to be exact. That's when the first mention of the legend first popped up on the internet. A local Texas reporter named Brian Bethel first wrote about his encounter with the black-eyed kids in Abilene, Texas. One night, Brian was sitting outside of a movie theater when two hooded kids approached his car, asking for a ride. Confused, Brian rolled down the window. The two kids insisted on a ride, but something was off from the start. Their voices and speech patterns were slightly off. It was like an impression of something that had never really interacted with a kid would think that a kid would sound like. When Brian got a closer look at the kids, all he saw was blackness in their eyes. Scared, confused, and feeling a strong sense of dread, Brian drove off. The kids were still banging on his car, asking for a ride as he pulled out of the parking lot. When he looked behind, the kids were gone. Brian told his close friends about his story, and slowly that story started to appear in forums and chat rooms online. He eventually published his article to document his first-hand account. Shortly after, others began to come forward, also claiming to have encounters with these creepy children. All the encounters had similarities. Although some only saw one child, most saw at least two, and sometimes three children together. The children's eyes were always obscured, mostly by hoodies. It was always late at night, and no parents were ever in sight. The kids would always talk strangely, whether it was odd speech patterns or weird word phrases. Just like the legend of the vampire, it would appear that the children needed an invitation from the witness to enter the house or vehicle. Other encounters would describe hearing children screaming and crying somewhere out in the darkness. Upon inspection, they would find a child out in the darkness alone, usually covering their eyes. When the witness would get closer to the child, they would reveal their eyes, and a sense of impending doom and dread would wash over the witness. If they blinked, ran, or turned away, the child would just disappear out of sight. No matter the situation that the witness had encountered the children, the effect after the sighting were all the same. All the witnesses felt an overwhelming sense of dread that lasted far after the first sighting. They would become withdrawn and aloof. A deep depression would usually set in, as if some type of darkness had clinged onto the victim. Some would even claim to see the children outside of their home and in public for months or sometimes years after the initial contact. The children would pop up on street corners or in shopping malls, always a good distance away, watching. Then they would just disappear without a trace. There have been thousands of sightings of these children all around the world, but there have been an unusual amount of sightings in the United States, around Texas and in the Midwest, along with a large group of sightings in the UK. During 1 week in September 2014, the British tabloid The Daily Star ran 3 sensational front-page stories about alleged sightings of black-eyed children, connected to the sale of a supposedly haunted pub in Staffordshire. There have been so many theories of what exactly these children are, ranging from pranking teenagers with contacts to shape-shifting fey creatures feeding off of victims' souls. The children seemed to be an amalgamation of a number of old folklore and legends, all rolled up into one story, just in time for the age of the internet. The first obvious connection would be the vampire. For whatever the reason, an invitation is needed by the children to enter the house. This lore goes back to the ancient custom of guest rights and the sanctity of the border of the home from public space. In ancient Greece, the border of your home would be blessed and offerings would be made to the god Terminus, thus ensuring protection for your house for another year. The black-eyed children also have flavors of fairies and other fake creatures of legend. Throughout history, there have been legends of these creatures shape-changing and luring people away into the night, never to be seen again. Some say the children might even have an extraterrestrial origin, and that they may be human-alien hybrids attempting abductions. In 2005, a woman in Washington state posted an encounter she had with these black-eyed children that she said would stay burned into her memory forever. Diane was a single mother that lived near Snoqualmie Pass with her 6-year-old daughter, Chloe. For about a week, Chloe would talk about her friend named Madison that she met in the woods. Diane didn't think much about this, as Chloe had a strong imagination and had numerous imaginary friends before. Chloe would go on and on about her new friend Madison and all their plans together. She told her mother that Madison would be coming to get Chloe and her mom for a fun trip that night, and that she should wait for her by the front door tonight. This caught Diane's attention. After some persuading from her mother, Chloe said that Madison and Madison's friends would meet Chloe in the woods, and that they needed her to come home with them. Diane pressed Chloe for where these kids exactly lived, but all Chloe would say was the woods. They lived in the woods. Creeped out, but still convinced these were probably some local neighbor children playing a trick on her daughter, she tucked Chloe into bed and started a movie, but not before locking all the windows and the doors. At some point, Diane wasn't sure when, she drifted off to sleep. She woke up to the knocking. It was light at first, then it got louder. She sat up in her chair as she was propelled into consciousness. It was coming from the front door. Diane forced herself up and towards the knocking. That's when the sound abruptly stopped. When she opened the door, there was no one there. After quickly closing and locking the door, Diane went and checked on her daughter. Chloe was still sound asleep, the light from her nightlight dancing on the ceiling. Click, click, click. Diane paused at the sound. Click, click, click. She heard it again now. Diane turned and glanced out the window behind her in Chloe's room. There in the window frame were 2 children. One was tall, looking about 8 years old, and the other was younger than Chloe, somewhere around 4 or 5. They were just staring. Diane felt a chill as she stared back. The children's eyes were jet black, their expressions unmoving. She recoiled in horror as they spoke. "Let us in," one of them asked. "Please let us in," the younger one repeated. Diane said by the time she turned on the light, the 2 girls were gone. She slowly approached the window and peered out, but could not see anything in the shadows of the backyard. That's when the crying started, somewhere out in the darkness. Chloe was now awake because of the light, and now the crying was getting louder. The 2 retreated back to Diane's room, but the voices only continued. "You promised," they said. "You promised you'd come with us," another cried. "Those are my friends, Mommy," Chloe exclaimed. "I have to go with them." The rest of the night, Diane held onto her daughter Chloe, using all her strength to keep her daughter from running out the house. Around 5 a.m., the voices stopped, and Diane was finally able to call the police. They showed up and inspected the house and the surrounding woods, but only found a pair of kids' footprints around the flower box under Chloe's window. The police wrote off the experience to local kids maybe playing pranks and never really investigated further. For years, Diane would have nightmares of those children. Strangely, Chloe would seem to lose her memory of her strange friends in that fateful night. Diane would never forget those faces and those black eyes. She described them as being more than black. They were somehow worse than black. She said it was hard to explain. They were what she could only describe as inky and bottomless. Chloe's now 23 and finishing up with college. Diane still lives in Washington, but not in the same house that she did all those years ago. She said she still thinks she sees those faces out of the corner of her eye, in the shadows. She said that she doesn't think that they're really there, at least physically. It seems that something from that night has stayed with Diane, something clinging to her, just in the background. Have you ever seen something in the darkness you can't explain? Let me know in the comments below. As always, I'm Broadcaster 7. Are you receiving the night signal?